Welcome to today's webinar session. My name is Wang Yi. I work for the Microsoft One Commercial Partner CTO office as a data and AI cloud solution architect. During the coming 1 hour, I will be covering the Azure Databricks as today's topic. So in this 1 hour, I'm going to talk about this one of the hero solutions in the Microsoft Azure Data Services ecosystem. And I will be talking about what it is and why we're having the services, and going to share with you some use cases in terms of how to use this into your solutions. And finally, I will go with some demos and the Q&A. So let's start. So I would like to start with what we call the modern data estate. So today, our customers actually trying to trying to take the advantage of the data and the maximum the value of the data. So what they're doing is they're trying to collect as much data as they are from the line of the business, CRM or transactional system with the image, social network, IoT, etc. And they created the data asset across the operational database, whether the SQL, NoSQL, and they're going to centralize the data into the data warehouse. And then with the more and more unstructured data coming, the people are going to build the data lake. And during this period of time, they also having we also see how the people actually do this on the premise, and they also moving to the cloud. And most importantly, a lot of customers want to have the flexibility to keep the sensitive data in the on-premise, and when they wanted to move to the cloud, they can move to the cloud based on the readiness, based on the data of the securities. So whenever it is, whatever the data format or with the setting, and what the customer, what the business user wanted to achieve is just want to reason on top of the data to get into the insight and benefit the organization. And they want to remain the flexibility to have a choice, because today, it's more and more open source software is coming to the market, we adopt. So, and finally, of course, when we do this, we want to do it with a peaceful mind. With the security is very important. So with this in mind, the Microsoft actually offering our services around this modern, how to modernize your data estate. So on-premise, of course, Microsoft have the famous product, SQL Server. So it works as a transactional database, and in fact, it also can do as a data warehouse solution. So in the Azure Data Services, we created we also have a SQL services, and meanwhile we have our Cosmos DB and the NoSQL, and then we have a list of the big data services initiative. And most importantly, there's only Microsoft doing this best, which we are creating the hybrid solution between the on-premise and also the cloud. For today's topic, was the Databricks is one of the biggest initiatives we created of the big data and the advanced analytics. In this page, we're actually saying something like a reference architecture. We're not going through the services one by one. The key is we're trying to share with you what exactly the Databricks going to work for your solution in a typical reference big data and advanced analytics applications. So when you look at from the left to right, you have the data source. When you do the ingesting, whether you're doing the batch or you're going to do the streaming. So when you're moving to the right-hand side, you can landing to the data lake storage. And then you're going to come to the choices, which are the Databricks and whether it's Hadoop. So what is highlighted here is the Databricks. And from the position, you probably can tell what we are trying to use in the Databricks is doing the computing, data preparation, and also the machine learning, building the models. So eventually, once you've done that, you can move the data into the Cosmos DB. If you do the mobile applications, you want the customer to see the predictions result immediately, or you want to do the serving layer coming up the reporting in the SQL database or data warehouse. So Azure Databricks fully built on top of the open source Apache Spark. So why the Spark? So Spark maybe some of you guys already heard about the name. So Spark so far is the most popular open source data process engine, which is built because it's popular because of speed, easy to use, and also the sophisticated analytics. So it's fast just because the whole technology is built on top of memory. Actually, it's a great computing, in-memory great computing technology. It should pull up all the memory into multiple machines. Therefore, you're able to process the data in the memory. Therefore, it's much faster. And it's the largest open source community now with more than 1,000 contributors, which means whenever there's a technology changes in the market, you always can get abreast of the latest technology and the features. So lastly will be the highly extensible, which is the Spark now supports Scala, Java, Python, and R. Almost all the popular languages you can think of is for the data engineering and also for the data scientists. And the reason why is because it supports Spark SQL, it have the graphic, Excel, and it's also streaming and the ML lab. So therefore, the Microsoft actually take the Databricks and creating as the first class of services on our platform. We put Databricks guys and the Microsoft guys work together, created these services during this March. And the tech line, which is fast and easy and the collaborative Apache Spark based on the analytics platform optimized for the Azure. So the firstly, is really designed in collaborative with the founder of the Spark, because the Databricks guys is the founder of the Spark. If you don't know that, until today, more than 75% of the coding is still contributed by the Databricks folks. So and with the collaborations between the Microsoft and also Databricks, we make it super easy for the provisioning, which is you can just do one click, which is able to provision the whole cluster. Then eventually you can streamline your workflow by using the scheduler, etc. We're going to show some demo later. So the biggest initiative I would say is unique for the Databricks, which compared to the open source, which they have the interactive workspaces, which eventually allows the different personnel in the data team, which whether they are data engineering, data scientists, and business analytics analysts, they are able to collaboratively work together with the workspace. And of course, with the Azure integrations, we did the integrations with Azure services with our other star services, which include the Power BI, SQL Data Warehouse, Cosmos DB, and the blob storage. And finally, and we'll probably see is most importantly, which is we did the integration with Active Directories, which will take care of your security. I did a lot of open source guys might already tried it. With some open source, when you set up, when you come to the production environment, come to the security, you find it super difficult to actually incorporate the security when you do the access control, compliance, etc. So this will be taken care by the Azure Security, which is the Active Directories. So what are the differentiated experience in Azure? Firstly, it definitely enhanced the productivities, which is the fast provisioning. We're talking about seconds, not hours, which is provisioning the cluster. And we already done the integration with the Power BI, which is immediately you can get your insight and the display in the dashboard, which is Power BI allows you to get this information from your desktop and the mobile applications. So it improved the collaborations just because the workspace I'm sharing. Later we're going to see from the demo. So therefore you're able to innovate faster. So then the second pillar, which is built on the most compliant cloud. You might know or don't know about this part. The Microsoft Azure, in fact, is the most compliant cloud compared to any other cloud providers, especially with their, the famous product Active Directories, which is a lot of enterprise users already having the Active Directories in the organization to manage their users and the membership. So we already done this integration offering in the cloud, so and can integrate directly with the Databricks services. That really makes the life easier. And finally, which is a scale out, scale without the limits, whether you want to scale up or we want to scale out, because we have the operations, the data centers across the whole world, and you literally are able to take advantage of all the data centers we're having to scale your workload. Now let's go a little bit closer to look at what the Databricks is. And the Databricks on top of Azure, which eventually have 3 tiers. In the bottom level, what you are seeing, the whole Databricks engine, which is built on top of open source Apache, but meanwhile, actually being optimized by Databricks teams, which is in addition to the core Spark features. The optimization allows you to run even faster compared to the open source Apache, which is almost like 10 times faster with a lot of unique features, something like a Databricks I/O, which allows you to have a second level of cache on top of Spark whenever, especially when you access those Hadoop HDFS files or remote files, which are able to caching to make the data query and exploring much faster. So then we're having this serverless cluster, which is eventually trying to, to really take care of this multi-tenancy environment when you run just want to run a job without managing any cluster. We're going to see the demos for that. So finally will be the RESTful API. So we build almost every actions on top of the Databricks. They have a UI feature, they have a command line, and behind the scene, that's the RESTful API. That this API, which eventually makes the integration works very well, and especially when you come in DevOps, it can really integrate with your DevOps pipeline very well. So you move up to the second level, which is firstly is multi-stage pipelines. So in the Databricks, they natively have this support, which is when you do the ETL, when you're trying to extract, transform, exploring, then eventually landing the data. So you build the data pipelines. So you have schedulers which are able to scheduling this pipelines as jobs. So meanwhile, of course, on top of that, we're going to keep all the notification and logs for you to do the monitoring, doing the troubleshooting, etc. So finally, this collaborative workspace. This might be the biggest differences when you look at the Databricks product and also the open source Apache, because open source Spark. Because when you do the Spark, you eventually using the the open source. Eventually you're going to submit the jar file, or you're going to do things. With this Workspaces, we actually build the data science notebook on top of that, which eventually allows the data engineering, data scientists, and also the business analysts, they are able to working with the same notebooks eventually are able to collaborate very well. And meanwhile, you have a very good integration, the left side with all the different cloud storage, data warehouse, Hadoop, and then you're able to, to make it build the models, be operationalized with other products in the right-hand side, and you're able to scale it. So now let me double-click and go into every tiers. So firstly, we start with the collaborative workspaces. So this eventually allows you to create a workspaces, which is just click a few buttons in the. You can really, make it up and running in seconds. Which we're going to show you how to do this later. And in this notebooks, we are supporting the R, Python, Scala, and SQL. So the collaborations across the team, and more importantly, which you can see, we make the integration with the GitHub and the big buckets, which allows you to do the version control and also eventually integrate with the DevOps pipeline. So the visualization side, it's very flexible. The workspace itself, the notebooks itself, have very rich features in terms of visualizations. And then meanwhile, you can leverage the third-party, D3 or ggplot to do your visualizations. So finally, with the dashboard, which we've done the integration with the Power BI. So the second layer, which is deploy the production jobs and workflows. this actually is pretty important. With the job scheduler and with you can directly, to make the notebooks as workflows rather than a jar file. Of course, meanwhile, we can do the jar file to make jobs. With this kind of features and job schedulers, literally, you are able to leverage the Databricks as the processing powers for any kind of the job integrations, which is for all your big data solutions. You can leverage the Databricks as your processing power, because you can process those batch jobs or micro batches within this Databricks. And then meanwhile, you've done the integrations. Natively integrated with the SQL Data Warehouse, Cosmos DB, Data Lake Store, Blob Storage, Event Hubs, etc. Which means whether you're doing the batch processing or streaming process, you don't have to even go out to other tools, because within the Databricks, you are able to just directly reading the data, write the data into those tools. The last one, of course, not the least, which is the optimized Databricks runtime engine. So the first one, we definitely want to talk about Databricks IO cache. This eventually allows you to really create a second level cache. You can leverage the SSD kind of technology to create this caching layer. Some people might heard about second level caching, the Hibernate, which eventually really allows you to really caching the data into somewhere, which eventually improve the reading performance. Because when you're really processing the large data, when you really access the remote file system like HDFS, which one data loading with a large volume, it might cost a lot of time. So the fully managed platform on Azure, this is probably also very important to mention, because right now the Databricks really is a fully managed service, the first-class services on top of the Azure, which means eventually you can search the Databricks from the first page, and you can immediately click a button and provisioning the Databricks, rather than you're going to do everything step by step, configure the cluster, do the security integration, etc. So the serverless infrastructure, which is today we also call it high concurrency infrastructure. So when you don't want to manage the cluster, you just want to run a random Spark jobs, something like that. You don't want to even see where the cluster is. Then with the multi-tenancy environment, you can leverage this cluster. Again, we're going to show a little bit in the demo later. Then we can really operate in a massive scope with the Microsoft Azure cloud across the worldwide. And we are supporting the GPU VMs. So now we move to some use cases about how we really take the advantage of the Databricks to really complete your design for whether it's the data warehouse or streaming solution or big data solution. Let's start with what we call modern big data warehouse. So you look at the Databricks at this part, which eventually really shows how it actually natively integrated with the Azure services, which is like a blob storage or SQL data warehouse, because eventually you are able to leverage the Databricks, leverage the data factories, which is our data integration tools across the on-premise cloud, allows you to really getting all the files, actually eventually landing to the blob storage. Then, after which you can directly access those data from the storage. Then over here you can do the data preparation, exploring, then doing the processing. And after you've done everything, you have the good insight. You want to persistent to somewhere, then eventually serve for the BI report. Then we have the integration with the SQL data warehouse. You can directly get the result to be returned into the SQL data warehouse. So the second solution, which eventually is the advanced analytics on the big data. So which is built on top of the previous data warehouse solution. On top of that, we actually trying to talk about this machine learning capabilities. You are able to build up the machine learning models on top of the Databricks. You can do those trainings. Then eventually with the models, you can do the optionalization over here. So not only that, So with this kind of integration, you can directly move all those predictions, alerts, anomaly detection result, etc., into the Cosmos DB, which we also again done the integration with the Cosmos DB. Now probably the fastest, global distributed NoSQL transactional database. So then you are able to immediately access from your mobile applications or desktop application or any other applications. So this actually shows the capability of the Databricks are able to become the engine for you to build the machine learning and the training those machine learning models. The last one, which is the real-time analytics on top of the big data, which is you might have heard about the Spark. They have what we call Spark streaming, which is allows you to really ingesting the data from those whether it's a Kafka or Event Hub or IoT Hub. Maybe some people already heard about the IoT Hub or Event Hub, which is you having auto streaming data coming as an event space. Then you're able to directly ingest to the Databricks, which is together with other machine learning models, etc., and the blob storage data inside the Databricks. You can immediately do some very meaningful stuff doing the real-time analytics by leverage the Databricks. So now we're going to move to some demos. Okay, I hope everyone can see my desktop. So for the people who have never used Azure, just for your information, this will be the welcome page for the Microsoft Azure portals. So eventually we have this home page, and the left-hand side you have a list of services which you can quickly navigate to those services and do the management and creation, etc. So earlier we were trying to see why it's called the first class of services. If you want to create a Databricks, you can come to this create resources. You just do a quick search. So now you are able to see the Azure Databricks is showing out with all those informations, the good informations you can see, and you can directly click the button to see create. But when you come to this page, you just give you a name for your workspace. Let's just see this is web demo. So I'm going to select one of subscriptions. If you have the cloud, you're supposed to have your own subscriptions. And then we're going to create a new groups, which is make it under one group, logic group. So I'm going to see it's a web group. Location-wise, I'm going to select the Southeast Asia, but meanwhile, you can see this Databricks is already available in the multiple regions, in the other countries and regions. So since we're sitting in Singapore, I'm going to just select the Southeast Asia. And the price tier-wise, so now you have 3 offers. Of course, you're going to see all the different details so when you're going to look at the price details. But eventually, there's a try, there's a premium and standard. The biggest differences between the standard and premium is you can probably do the role-based controller with the premium. So I'm just click this one to do the create. Now the provisioning is happening, the deployment in the progress. I'm not going to wait for that because I already have existing cluster workspace already created. If you can look at my left side, I click the Azure Databricks. You can see I have a multiple workspaces already be provisioned. I'm going to pick one of those to show our demos. So I'm going to click this one. So on this page, you can see with the Databricks workspace created, you are able to see some document to get some get started demos, admin guide, etc. You can directly launch the workspaces. But what I'm going to show you this is if you're going to click this one, so you can see it's all actually under my name, which is with the different workspaces name with my name. So this tells our integration already done with between the Active Directories and your specific workspaces. If I'm going to just click this workspaces, it comes to the Azure Databricks's homepage. So on the Azure Databricks homepage, you can see some common tasks you might want to do immediately, and some recently tasks you have done. You might visit all those notebooks and some document links. So of course, the first there are a list of the things you can do, but the first and foremost, you definitely want to create a cluster first. So I'm going to just click the new cluster, but you also can come to a cluster from the left-hand side. You can see I have one of the clusters running, and if I'm going to create a new cluster, okay, this will be very interesting. When you create a new cluster, firstly, of course, you're going to give some cluster name. So now you have two models you can select. Usually we're going to take the standard one, but this will be the high concurrency model, which eventually you just want to have a multi-tenancy environment. People don't want to manage the cluster. They just want to get the pool resources to run some Spark jobs. Then you can select the high concurrency. For this demo, we just select the standard. So for the Databricks runtime, so eventually you can select the Spark versions with the Scala versions, and also whether it's a GPU or CPU. So we go for the default, and you also can select the pre-installed Python environment. We're going to see 3. So then you can have drivers and workers. For the people maybe already know the Spark architecture, you probably know what does mean this driver and what does mean the worker. So in the layman term, eventually driver is a separate node. Eventually are able to work like a manager to arrange the task, then eventually send to the different workers that worker to work. So therefore, we have two different type of nodes. So you can select the same as a worker, but you also can choose a different machines. So eventually, we have a different setup for the virtual machines. You can just go and select the one. Likewise, the worker, I'm not going to repeat this one, but what is really, really cool is this features and this features, which is eventually the auto-scaling and also the terminations after certain times. So the first one is eventually you can create what minimal worker nodes, which is when the cluster be provisioned, then you're going to get the 2 nodes. But the maximum workers, which means after you enable the auto-scaling, when the load, which is really become heavy, and the 2 of the nodes are not able to perform the task, then the cluster will start to scale out, which is creating the more nodes up to 8 nodes. So the auto terminations, which is because a lot of customers, when they use the Hadoop cluster on the cloud, they forget to turn off the cluster, which eventually really burn a lot of money. So the terminations, which is designed for you, if you don't use this cluster, the cluster doesn't have any activities running on top of it within 120 minutes, 2 hours with no activities, then the cluster will be shut down automatically. So then you are able to, from this tabs, you are able to give the further customizations on top of your Spark, whether you want to, these are the typical Spark parameters, or you want to tune like memory, shuffles, etc. So the logins and also the initial scripts. Initial script might be very useful. Eventually, when you want to launch the cluster, you want to pre-install some machine learning libraries or the test flow, etc. You actually can customize everything from here. So here I'm just again going to create a cluster. I'm not going to wait for the cluster to be created, but meanwhile we already have the one cluster be created. And on this cluster, what you're able to see is you can have the Spark UI and the logs for this cluster. You're able to do the clone. This might be very useful because when you wanted to execute another set of job with exactly the same configurations of cluster, then you're able to just clone this cluster, and then immediately you will get exactly the same cluster like the other cluster. So permission-wise, this is another very cool stuff, because when you've done the integration of Active Directories, now you're able to really, ground access for the different users, to give them the different permissions, whether they are able to start or restart the cluster, because some people might only can use this cluster, but they don't have they cannot touch the cluster or change anything about the cluster. So after we've done the cluster provisioning, the next very important one is the workspaces, which is when you click the workspaces. This is the places to keep all your notebooks, whether your Spark notebooks or Scala notebooks. And when you click the users, you might see the different user. Under the different user, they also have their own set of the notebooks. So for this demo, I'm going to choose this one. Let's look at the first one with the data engineering and the data scientist. As you can see, we are basically reading the data from the Azure SQL data warehouse. Because we already done the integration, then we can easily just provide all the parameters, connection information for warehouse. Then we are able to immediately reading the data, then start exploring the data to look at the data. Then you can do the visualization by having the chart. We're going to see some demo later. So and this part, you can see we are able to directly reading the data from the blob storage. Now you can see we are able to reading the data from the SQL data warehouse. We're able to reading the data from the blob storage. And this is the JSON format data, but with the Spark, we can easily to pass this one as a table. Then eventually you are able to correlate this data together in the Databricks immediately because you have, they are all registered inside the Databricks. Now you are able to use the data frame, start to really do the manipulating the data, drawing and correlations, etc. In the same place. So immediately you are getting the SQL and NoSQL structured and unstructured data be correlated together. So and then you are able to visualize the data. We are reading the historic data, products historic data. Then you are able to see these visualizations. So this one is, shows you how to build the models with the data science capabilities. For this one, we're trying to look at the this whole demo is about the recommendation for the e-commerces, which is some people stay in the certain pages, look at a certain product, then we're trying to predict what they are other interested. So we're using this KN to trying to classify other product he might be interested. He look at these shoes, then we're trying to use a machine learning models SLA, so eventually trying to predict what the other shoes he might be interested. So this will be the result you're able to see. He look at the one pair of the shoes, then he might be interested on this other shoes. So these models we build with the simple machine learning models. But what is cool about Databricks is beside the normal machine learning models, they also can do with the deep machine learning, which they eventually look at the features of the images. Then you are able to build the models, leverage the deep machine learning. So these are the models we created. Then subsequently, we're trying to predict the result again. At this time, you probably see the result is even better. These are the shoes that the customer look at it, and these are the shoes, quite similar to the result. So this are another samples. So you are able to, see the customer look at the shoes, and then they can, get the recommendation for the shoes, quite close to what they like it. So the last one, which is eventually all the prediction result, we can immediately, push them to although I command this out, but eventually we are able to write them to the Cosmos DB. So then you are able to push to the mobile users so they can eventually see what they like, what they recommend to the customers. So the other demos what I want to show is the streaming capabilities. So we already customized the Kafka to start the Kafka with the integrated with the data warehouse. And then we start to, reading the data from the data warehouse. And we also trying to, display the Kafka data. We're trying to get this streaming data and then join with our, this data warehouse data, then getting some meaningful result. And what is cool is about literally you can see the ingestion rate. If you start Kafka, you literally can see the ingestion rate, how much data you are receiving, and the batch durations. So finally, again, in the real time, you are able to query the data and then to visualize the data with the different regions and the countries. So this is about the demos I want to show, and others might not very important, but it's good to know, which is the jobs. So we don't have a jobs here, but what is really interesting to see is let's just choose one of the notebooks. You can immediately, if you're happy with this process, you can immediately schedule this as a jobs. You can create new jobs. So you can immediately give the scheduler to key in your intervals, starting at what times, etc. Then you can see, okay. So once you've done this jobs, so then the jobs will be eventually displayed. Now we can see this this job is created. So subsequently, you can get this job run based on your scheduler. So with that, thanks for your time. We're going to go with the Q&A sessions.